And we're going to take a look at an oral history interview that I did not too long ago with Marshall Rowland, pioneer country music broadcaster. You had a band. You were a member of a band that performed in the very, very early days of TV4.
Harry, I'd like to back up a little bit. I came out of a little small town in South Georgia in 1947. Excuse me. Wow. And anyhow, played in the band, the Florida Playboys. Ray Charles had been in the band, and it didn't work out, and he moved on. So they hired me as a steel guitar player.
You replaced Ray Charles.
Well, in a way. But anyhow, that's the way it happened. And I played in the band for about 2.5 years. And in fact, I think I told you earlier when we were doing our little chatting that our band played on Channel 4 when it first went on the air way back in 47 or 49 or whenever it was, 49.
49,
And then after that, I had my own band around here. I was a disc jockey for years, but I had a yearning to own my own radio station. So we built the station in Fernandina Beach in September of 1955. 2 years after that, I had sold all the $1 spots I could sell in Fernandina, and I still was just barely eking out a living.
And the call letters were?
WFBF. Our slogan was, "We feed bullfrogs."
Okay.
That's a little humor. But anyhow, after a couple of years, I was able to go in with my father-in-law, and we bought WQIK, it had been on the air for maybe a year. It was a 1,000-watt daytimer. And we were able to take it for the first, it had already established itself as the first country music station around. And so we bought it and paid I think it was $110,000 for it, and I was able to scrape up 10, and my pa-in-law scraped up 10, and that was a bad thing. Not buying the station, but my pa-in-law, he had shrimp boats and timber, and he counted the pennies, and I wanted to grow with the radio station. So anyhow, after a few months, I was able to buy him out, and the rest is history. We owned WQIK from then until 1984. And
that was WQIK AM.
That's correct.
And later you got an FM license.
Exactly. That was interesting, too. The FCC, when they started turning loose FM licenses, normally it took a long time, sometimes a year or two. In fact, sometimes you never get a license for a new facility, AM or FM or whatever. But when the FCC turned loose the FM channels back in those days, we also had a little daytimer. I'd built one up in Macon, Georgia, country station. My wife went to college up there, and I was up there one day with nothing to do, and there's no country music in this town.
So you decided to buy a radio station.
Right. So, no, I built one. I built a little AM station on 15 way up in the glove compartment. And anyhow, we got an FM license for Jacksonville, and one for Macon, Georgia at the same time, overnight, with less than 2 weeks' time, and we put WQIK FM on the air.
Now, if you can, give us a little bit of a feel for what radio was like in those days.
Well, Harry, I've had a wonderful career. I'm the most blessed, thankful man ever. From the day we walked into WQIK, it just started making money, and it not a great amount, but we paid the bills, and I had great sponsors, and the sponsors took a liking to me. I didn't have much of an education earlier back in Georgia. I did go through high school, but people like Hoyt Cotney Tire Service, this old man taught me more about business and how to deal with people and all in my early years of radio and all. And, you know, you just get so carried away there's nothing else. Radio was my whole life.
Describe the situation now. How many other stations were there? Was there another country music station? Or?
Not here, no. No. We had
so you carved out a niche.
Right, exactly. It was the first daytime on 1280. WQIK was, and then we went to 5,000, and I eventually moved it up to 50,000. But that wasn't profitable. By that time, FM had beginning to take over. Let me tell you a little interesting thing. I was so excited about the FM station. One of our friends owned, and I can't remember the distributorship, but now it's out on Liberty Street. But I got him to order me 500 FM radios from China. And we went on the air on our AM station selling those things so that people could have country music at night. So
because
that was in the first 2 months of...
it was a brand new format. People did not own FM receivers.
No, exactly.
Just like when this station went on the air in 1949,
the city had
people didn't own TV sets.
Exactly. The city had an FM station, and there may have been one or two others. Jones College, I don't remember. But we were one of the pioneers in FM and all. In fact, when I first applied for the FM, we applied for something way down around 92 or so, and got a call from an engineer at the FCC and says, if you'll swap and take 99.1, we'll send you the license tomorrow. I said, send it on.
And so 99.1 is still there.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
So what else were those WJAX?
The city-owned station. Yeah, they had an FM.
And WMBR.
Yeah, and WJHP had an FM too, because I worked for a short period. They had a thing called bus radio where they programmed the FM station into all the city buses, and they needed someone to ride the control board and just play the records. I guess I learned more about pop music back then than ever in my life.
And while we're on the subject of WJHP, they went into the television business briefly.
That's exactly right, Jim. That was where I was a DJ for several years there. Gentleman from who was on Channel 4 also, excuse me, WMBR, Ted Chapeau was the morning man on the journal station, WJHP, and he left to come to 1460 WMBR, and so they gave me the whole morning slot. And like I said, I've been lucky as all get out. I was a new fella. I had my morning show, and I sold my own ads and things like that. And a fella called me one day and says, I'm building a new radio station here. How'd you like to go to work for us? And I went over to visit him. WRHC it was. Mr. Cohn, his name was. And I said, well, I'm happy where I am. He says, well, and he asked me how much I billed and one thing and the other. And he says, well, we'll give you half of it. And I said, golly, I'm only making 15% where I am. So being naive and honest, I wanted to be honest. I went back and talked to the manager of the station. I said, Mr. Reynolds, I said, this man has offered me half of what I bill. And his first words were, we'll match it. And I thought, I've doubled my salary overnight. But that's the early days of radio.
Right. And you stuck with country and Western music,
over the years, yeah, it was great. We had some wonderful, we got into promoting shows. The Jacksonville Coliseum, I think, was built in 1961. And Billy Graham was the first event, had a week-long crusade.
Really?
And right after that, we promoted what we called country music festivals. And
this was something new.
It was, yeah. I had, back then you could buy an artist for $1,000 a night. I had $8,000 in the first show we presented. Patsy Cline, Ray Price, and I can't remember. It must have been 10 different artists.
Right.
And I wanted to make certain that more than anything else, the auditorium was full. So we priced our tickets at $2. Well, the night of the event, we had a stampede. The Coliseum wouldn't hold them all. And that you know, I learned from that. Yeah, I guess hard knocks or whatever. We didn't make any money off that first show, but boy, we had a great promotion then.
And it paved the way for a lot of future shows.
Absolutely. After that, of course, we knew how to price our things. And one of the most interesting shows I ever had was Charlie Pride. He started out in '70, I think it was, and we booked him on what was our most successful show ever. But I don't like to talk too much about money. I'm just happy that I'm able to retire comfortable and one thing and the other.
Well, there's another legendary performer that you can talk about.
All right.
Let's talk about Elvis.
I'll go in detail on this one.
On Elvis, right.
There was a lady here named May Axton. Her husband, John Axton, was a football coach out at Paxton High. And May, I don't know how she just kind of made the central point for country music. Glenn Reeves was on another station here in town, and Frank Thies, who used to both of those later worked with me. Frank was on another station, and May, she just was the kind of the focal point. And Colonel Tom Parker came to town and said he's bringing this show. It was Hank Snow and the Wilburn brothers, I remember, on it. Farron Young was on it. And this new star he had named Elvis Presley. And me being a morning DJ, I had started playing some of Elvis's records, because most of his earlier ones were upbeat and up-tempo, and I like to play lively music in the morning.
Including Heartbreak Hotel?
Oh, yeah. Well, this was before that.
Oh, okay.
We met with the Colonel, and he says, you fellas promote this thing, and I'll do right by you. He says, I won't promise you anything, but you just work hard for me. Well, I did. I mean, almost between every record, I was promoting this great show coming to the Gator Bowl of all places. Oh. And that was unusual. But the event came. I almost got arrested over it. I got so carried away, and maybe I should tell this, or maybe I shouldn't. But anyhow,
go ahead.
The last day or two, I put loudspeakers on my car and rode up and down the road, coming to town, this big extravaganza featuring Elvis Presley and all that. Well, I stopped at a red light out on Pearl Street, and the cop pulled up behind me and says, what are you doing, you idiot? And I said, I'm promoting a great show. He says, you realize where you are? And I was right in front of the hospital. So you learn by, like I said earlier, you learn through your hard knocks. But we went on and had the great show. It had 30-some thousand people in the Gator Bowl that night. And afterwards, I was on pins and needles, because I had really worked hard on this thing, and the Colonel hadn't promised us any money. He told us at the end of the show, says, you boys come on up to my hotel room in the Roosevelt Hotel, and I'll pay you off. Well, we all four went up there. And he was a different kind of gentleman, Colonel Tom was. I didn't know him very well, but I encountered him a couple of times later with the Jacksonville Fair out in Nevada. But anyhow, that night we got up there in the room, and he took out of his hand or his coat pocket or somewhere 4 rolls of $1,000 each, wadded up. You know how much money that was in 1970, whatever it was?
A lot.
1950 something.
Right.
So anyhow, he threw 4 rolls of $1,000 on the floor. Guess who was the first person to get down on the floor? But anyhow, that's the kind of, you know, that was interesting.
So your first experience with Colonel Parker was positive?
Elvis, yeah.
And did that continue to be the case?
Well, I later, right after that promotion, I moved to Fernandina and started my first radio station. Years later, we tried to book Elvis. Colonel Thomas' son-in-law lived in Tampa. Bob, I can't think of his last name now, but he told me that the Colonel was interested in bringing Elvis to town. So I worked my can. I called the Colonel and talked to his office and everything, and they said, yes, line up the dates, and here's what we want. So I worked Macon. We had a station in Macon then doing real well, and we cleared the home show up there and one thing and another so we could make room for Elvis on a Friday night. We worked on it. Bill Lavery was the Coliseum manager here in Jacksonville, and we worked on booking that date, and the next night in Tampa at the Curtis Hickson Hall. Well, I don't know how much time lining up all these dates, and I called the Colonel back. I said, Colonel, I got them all lined up. Here they are. He said, good. Send me $100,000 for each night, and we're ready to go. And I said, what? I ain't got that. I barely meet the payroll this week. Come on. So anyhow, they came to town, and it was a good show, and my wife and I went to see it, as a matter of fact. And he spent a lot of money with us advertising. So.
How much later was this from the first time?
Oh, this was on up. I'll tell you one thing. Elvis was very hefty at the time.
He'd become very big by then.
Right, and I mean in stature, in size, not necessarily in image or whatever. He'd always been big there. But it wasn't too long after that he passed away.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back and talk about your early days. I know you started playing guitar at the age of 12 or 13 and became part of a band and performed, we mentioned earlier, performed at Channel 4 soon after it signed on.
Exactly.
And, but at some point you decided you wanted to really get into radio, not just playing in a band.
Yeah, back then, you know, it was the end of World War II and a few years afterwards, and people were still in a good time mood. The men were coming home with mustering out pay. I was only 16, 17 years old when the war ended. And there was a lot of honky-tonking, and I guess there still is. I just don't know for sure today. But I did real well. I had the morning disc jockey show, which I told you about earlier, and I had my own little band. We played out at the Mandarin Athletic Club every Saturday night, and when people would want us for other events and all. It helped me raise enough money to build my first radio station, and it did. But I gave it up. I could see raising a family. We have 4 boys, my wife and I do, and I could just see that that wasn't the way to go, dodging beer bottles on Saturday night and go to church on Sunday morning.
So radio was more...
that's when I began to really think seriously about seriously, I should say, about a new career, radio.
As contrasted to performing in a band and so forth. Yeah. And so the first radio station was in Fernandina Beach.
Yeah.
250 watt station?
It started out at 250, up in the glove compartment on top of that. 1570.
For people who don't know radio, when you refer to up in the glove compartment, you're talking about frequency.
Across the radio band, you almost over into the glove compartment.
I understood what you said, but I wasn't sure everybody else would. And I think you started your first job before being in a band and so forth. You worked at a dairy farm?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I started to work there when I was 12 years old. I've always been real lucky. As I said earlier, I'm the most blessed man and the luckiest man you'll talk to in this interview, in your series. I didn't have much parentage when I was coming up. When my younger brother was born, they took my mother to a sanitarium. My daddy had hired a housekeeper, and he sent money for a little while, but after a while he just kind of disappeared, and the lady that he had hired either was faced, and I remember people coming to the house, even though I wasn't but 4 or 5 years old, talking about an orphanage or whatever, but she wound up taking us out to a little community called Waynesville, where her 2 sisters had an old little grocery store, and they raised us. That's where I lived at the time. I went to work at the dairy when I was 12. I also learned to play about that time, and a fellow that was blind in one eye, I'd been to the blind school, little Henry Wiggins, taught me to play. We would go to people's houses, and they would move the furniture out of the living room, and we'd sit over in one corner and play for dance. this is I learned. this would, you get the people out there ready to dance, and you stop and pass the hat. So that's how we made our money. But working at the dairy...
As contrasted to trying to collect after them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
So we'd pass the hat and play for dances, and I made a little money there. I had an unusual thing happen at the dairy when I was 14 years old. I got my driver's license. It was right at the end of the war, and it was a necessary event or occasion or something that they would grant driver's licenses to younger people. And I walked into the highway patrol station. They saw me drive up in the milk truck, and so they gave me a driver's license. Well, in my last year of high school, the school bus, I went to school in Hunter, Georgia, and the school bus driver had a seizure, and it darn near killed everybody on the bus, but we got it under control, and there was nobody else to drive the bus. So, and we were no telephones around. We were out in the middle of nowhere. So I got behind the wheel and took the children, the rest of the guys home. I said children, took my friends, really, schoolmates, and parked the bus, went to work at the dairy, and when I came back, one of my buddies said, "Man, you're in deep trouble," said the supervisor of schools has been down here, and he's going to put you in jail for driving the bus. And I said, "Well, I'll go face him now." And I did, and he said, "You're Rowland?" I said, "Yes, sir." R.D. Driver, his name was. He says, "You drove the school bus." I said, "Yes, sir. There was nobody else to take care of the people there. We could have sat out there for days, I guess." And he says, "How'd you like to drive it for the rest of the year?" I was making $212 a month driving the school bus, playing at night. We're still working at the dairy. Had all the gas I could burn, which was rationed during then. And I had transportation out to wherever I wanted to play. I drove the school bus.
That was an oral history interview with Marshall Rowland, pioneer country music broadcaster.